Okay. I just wanted to start by talking about washing machines. I think it's really important that what we think about this weekend is some of us, in my house, I'm lucky I have somebody who does it for me, get our clothes washed. We go to a washing machine, we stick the clothes in the washing machine, we press the button, and at the end, hopefully the clothes come out unmangled and clean. And if they come out in some other way, we might call an engineer to come over and look at our machine and see if it can be fixed. And electoral systems are a bit like that. So there are certain people who know an awful lot about electoral systems, and that's their job, particularly people involved in the counting of votes. They know how they operate, and it's their job to make sure it operates. The job of the citizen is to vote and to have some sense of understanding of how their vote is going to matter and have some sense of understanding of what kind of result comes out at the end. And I think it's very important before, as we begin today, to just think about that the job today is not to become experts on the mixed member proportional system. We can't do that in a couple of hours. We can't even do that in a couple of weeks. This would take a lot longer to do it properly. It makes a lot more sense that the best thing to try and come out of this morning at least is a good understanding of what are the advantages of this system, the mixed member system versus the single transferable vote system. What are the good points, what are the bad points? Why is it worthwhile thinking about it as an alternative system for Ireland? So I just wanted to start with that kind of warning note. So why mixed member proportional? I want to follow up on Tom's comments as to why we are where we are today. We are here today talking about this, obviously, because the government put it on the programme for government, that they wanted the Constitutional Convention to discuss the possibility of changing the electoral system. And these are the sort of points that are often made as to why we might want to change our electoral system, that we have TDs focusing far too much on local politics, running around the constituency, doing their constituency work, and therefore not giving enough attention to their national work as national parliamentarians, their legislative role in the Dáil, the sort of things that parliamentarians, as we observe in other countries, seem to be doing much more of. So there's that sort of thing about the focus of our TDs. It's a bit too focused on the constituency. There's also a point often raised about the quality of our TDs, and I don't mean to insult anyone in the room by just raising it. It's a point that is raised. There's a sense that perhaps we could get a better quality of TD, somebody with a bit more expertise, if we went to a different electoral system. And so that leads to the last point, that we might want more talent in politics, more expertise in politics. And these were the points that were raised at various stages, not least before the most recent election. Many of the political parties in their manifestos, many of the commentators in the election talked about the failings of our system of politics and attaching the blame for that to our electoral system, raising these kind of points. So the argument is that if we moved to the system that you've asked us to consider this week, the mixed member proportional system, we have an electoral system that combines constituency and national representation in one electoral system. So it seems we're getting the best of both worlds. This quote, the best of both worlds, is frequently used to describe this system. It seems to be nirvana. It's the miracle system, the cure-all for everything, because it gives us constituency politicians, so we still get the lovely thing that we want of constituency politicians running around and doing the things that we want done in our constituencies, the things we want to raise as constituents of our politicians. And we combine that with national politicians. Politicians who, this is the argument, politicians who will focus on the national rather than the constituency, who think the bigger things, who will be focused on bigger pictures. And a third feature that is often raised about this system as compared to our system is you get much better proportionality. And what I mean by that is if you have more proportionality, you're going to get a lot more small parties. You're going to get a lot more women TDs. You're going to get a better form of representation in terms of the types of TDs that get elected. So they're seen as the big advantages. So let's take you through each of those in turn. So we start with the constituency politicians, the constituency TDs. So we'd still have the constituency offices being done for us by the TD in the constituency, the regular surgeries, the dealing with local issues, all the things that we're familiar with as citizens in this country, we could still have, according to this argument, in the form of the constituency politicians. But let's just raise a few points about them. The slide goes off the edge a bit, but I think you can still see it. The basic model which I'm talking about, but Michael Gallagher in a few minutes will talk about variants from this, is that we would have TDs elected using the British electoral system. This is how it would work if we followed the German way. So we'd have one TD per constituency. And because of that, that bit of the election is a non-proportional election, what you then tend to get is that most of those seats are won by the larger parties. That's an important point. Most of those seats are won by the larger parties. The small parties don't win many constituency seats because it's a non-proportional election for this part. Another feature that you'll get, I just want you to be aware of this, but I can't really go into too many details, and Michael Gallagher will again go into it a bit more detail. You get surplus seats. You get the possibility of surplus seats, because you can get some large parties, this happens in Germany quite regularly, who pick up lots of constituency seats, and they win more constituency seats than a fully proportional outcome in the final election should allow them to win. So they win more seats than they're supposed to win, and they're allowed to keep those seats. And as a result, the size of their parliament goes up. In the last German election, the size of the German parliament had to increase by, I think it was 26 seats, because there were so many surplus seats. So that is a feature. There are ways around it, but none of the ways work terribly well. If you bring in a system like this, you have the risk that from one election to the next, the size of the dole will have to go up a bit and then come back down again, hopefully at the next election. So surplus seats is an anomaly that you need to be aware of in this. And another feature of this system is that you wouldn't get very many independents. It's much harder for an independent to win a constituency seat in Britain than it is to win a seat in this country, because it's a non-proportional system. So you get far fewer independents. And the independents in this system can only run in constituencies. Because when we go to the next bit, the party list bit, by definition, only parties can put up lists of candidates. So the only independents that would win in mixed member proportional system are those that would pick up the constituency seats. So you would end up probably with less independents. I think it's a safe bet than we currently have. Some would see that as a welcome thing, but some would see that as a bad move. It's just something to be aware of. So here we get to the second part of the system. It's a mix of two systems, the list TDs. So the list TDs, this is what the argument is. You have this ministerial pool. You have parliamentarians. You've got TDs who are now focused on their role as parliamentarians rather than the role as constituency servants. You have the potential for more technical expertise to come in, because people can be put up at the top of the list to get elected, and TDs who focus on national issues. So the features of this then, you've got TDs elected using the list system. Those of us who did the masterclass last night, which we'll hear more about from Art in a few minutes, will know how that operated and how complex that can be. But you will have the TDs elected by lists that are drawn up by the political parties. So the Fianna Fáil party, the Fine Gael party, the Sinn Féin party, whatever party you want, will pick their list. They will rank the candidates in their order of preference. And you as a voter can only vote for that party list. You can't change the ranking. You can't change the order. And to go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, most of these seats will be won by the smaller parties, not by the larger parties, because the larger parties would have picked up lots of constituency seats. So they can't get that many list seats as a result of this. And you won't get any independents. So what we then have is a mixed member proportional system. So we have the bolting together of two systems, the constituency system and a list system. And this, as I started with, is the reason why many people talk about this system as the best of both worlds. Because we have, constituency politicians like we want them, looking after all the things that we need done in the locale. And we have those list politicians that are sort of looking after the bigger questions. In other words, what that in essence is getting at is that we have worker bees working away in the constituencies and philosopher kings doing the things that matter to the important people at the top. That's the essence of the argument. You get your worker bees, the TDs that we love today, doing the things that we want done as constituents. And I'm trying not to be derogatory in saying that. That is an important feature of our system of representative politics. But the worker bees, that's the argument of those who favour moving to the system. They're effectively saying you'll have two types of TDs. Those who are running around, madly doing all the things that matter on the ground, and then these big learned technocrats at the top who are the people who will form the government and be the ministers and be the people who do the most important stuff to make sure the state runs properly. But I just want to leave you with the question mark. Is that necessarily what you would end up with? Because remember, a few minutes ago I told you that at least in this version, and Michael will talk about other options that might sort of solve some of this, in this version, most of the philosopher kings, if we can call them those, will be in the small parties. And generally, the history of politics everywhere, and here included, is that governments are formed around the larger parties. Today, it's Fine Gael who have most of the ministerial positions, not Labour. But Fine Gael under this model would have very few philosopher kings. They'd have mostly worker bees because they would have won so many constituency seats, they won't get very many list seats. And a second thing just to be aware of is the phenomenon of dual candidates. Because a common feature of this electoral system, this is just the way it works, is that you will have politicians running both for the constituency election and for the list election. So if we use this system, then Gerry Adams, if Sinn Féin were operating this system in a rational way, would run both in his constituency and he would be top of his list, because that is the most rational way for the party to run it. And the idea would be that if he doesn't win the constituency seat, he would still pick up a list seat. Now, why would they do that? Why do they do that? It's because if you think about it, if you are a list candidate and you're looking at the possibilities of the outcome, if your party picks up too many constituency seats, your job's on the line. Because if your party wins, the more constituency seats it wins, the less list seats it's going to end up with. So eventually there's a danger that you're not going to get a seat. So that's going to invite a huge degree of antagonism between the list politicians and the constituency politicians. So for that reason, more than anything else, what you tend to find is that they run on both. In most systems, with the Welsh is the only example that we know that is different from this for all sorts of reasons known to itself. They run for both, which means that in the lifetime of your average politician in this kind of electoral system, he or she will be a constituency politician in one parliament and a list politician in the other. And that means, in essence, that they both operate in the same way. They both operate as constituency politicians. So you don't really get the philosopher king type in the way that many of the proponents would argue you do out of this system. So my final slide, issues for you to consider as the day unfolds. I think it has to be said, this is an extremely complex system. Ask anyone who was at the masterclass last night about just how complex this system can be, and we really simplified it. You will get a big plus, you get much more proportionality, so you'll get smaller parties, you'll get a better gender representation and all of that goes with better proportionality. There's a question mark over whether you really will get the worker bee versus philosopher king difference. It's a big question mark. There's a question mark over whether we'd have as many independents, good thing or bad thing. And so ultimately there's a question over whether this really is the best of both worlds. So I'll stop there. Thanks.